John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles, of course, and they're getting ready for the Steelers. Today, the two coordinators spoke in some very interesting things there. We also had some interesting things here on the show, John. In fact, last hour when we talked to Casey Joyner, he said something I think perked all of our ears up, and I would like to get your take on this. He said in the 15 years that he's been breaking down quarterbacks in film, he has not seen a rookie this advanced than Carson Wentz, and I know there's been a lot of hype, but is that too much hype, or is that something that you can concur with possibly?
I don't know if I can go back 15 years. I would say in this generation of football, since things have morphed at the college level, which we talked about the other day, I think he is the most prepared as far as autonomy at the line of scrimmage and just ability to handle things that traditional quarterbacks do. In fact, you know, most young quarterbacks, and you'll probably see it tonight with the Patriots, they're not prepared for that kind of stuff. So coaches tend to limit the playbook and scale things back, cut the field into sort of half reads or high-low reads, and just simplify things because they're not ready. With Carson Wentz, if anything, the Eagles' playbook has expanded because of his athleticism and his running ability compared to Sam Bradford. So from that perspective, yeah, I mean, you just don't see it with rookie quarterbacks. You don't even see, I mentioned the other day, forget about audibilize, a true audible. You don't see the average rookie quarterback handling things like pointing out protections. They allow the center to do that. And it's amazing how far along Carson Wentz is. And from that point, you can't throw enough accolades on him because his preparation is off the charts. You've seen it in the past, though, but you've seen it in different generations where you had pro-style offenses at the college level. We haven't seen it recently, and I think that causes everyone to go, what the heck is this? We've never seen anything like it. You just have to go back a while.
John, today at the press conference with Frank Reich, I thought something was interesting because when you say Frank Reich, I think you think of Frank Reich, the backup quarterback from Buffalo, more so than the guy who worked with Peyton Manning, Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis and San Diego. He was asked about, working with those guys and, how that has kind of helped him help Carson Wentz here. But I think that's something that's missed in this whole thing is that all of the guys around him, but a guy like Frank Reich, again, we just look at him as a backup quarterback, not understanding some of the talent that he has helped out along the way to get to where he is right now, working with a guy like Manning and Rivers.
Yeah, and Doug worked with Marino and Favre. So think about the guys they've worked with. That's one of the things, I've talked about it a lot, is one of the things the Eagles set up this, and John DeFilippo also was a quarterback at the college level, the quarterback's coach, where if you look at Jared Goff, for instance, he's got a head coach that's a defensive-minded guy. His offensive coordinator was a tight ends and an offensive line coach. And his quarterback's coach is Chris Wenke. Obviously, your quarterback's coach is going to be a quarterback. But he doesn't have a ton of experience. I mean, he's barely off the field as far as coaching goes. Whereas, as you mentioned, the Eagles, not only do they have quarterbacks at head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, but they've worked with Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Jim Kelly, Brett Favre, as I mentioned, Dan Marino, Phillip Rivers might be. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think you can underestimate the knowledge that is in that quarterback room as far as helping Carson Wentz. But even more so than that, I think it's the realization you have guys who understand how to play the position at the NFL level. And they know it's very, very helpful for a quarterback to be able to change things at the line of scrimmage if he's capable of doing it. There are a lot of headstrong coaches in this league Chip Kelly, who won't allow quarterbacks to do that. And Chip's not the only one. I just like to get my daily dig in on Chip. But he's not the only one. There's a lot of coaches in this league that say you're going to run what I tell you you're going to run. I think Doug and Frank specifically realize, look, if you have a star quarterback, you have to let him handle some things at the line of scrimmage because it's going to help you as a coach immensely.
John McMullen with us, talking Eagles football. And John, Casey Joyner told us that Pittsburgh doesn't sack the quarterback all that much, but Carson has been very good against the blitz so far. So how do you see them attacking the Steelers' defense this week?
Well, the Steelers' defense is morphed. It's not the one you think of in the past with Dick LeBeau and the huge aggression. It's kind of morphed into a combination. They still use the 3-4 front predominantly, but they play a lot of zone coverage, and they don't blitz quite as much. But what they do is they try to disguise coverages a lot more than they used to. So this is a different kind of test for Carson. I think, a lot of what Cleveland and Chicago did was try to pressure him on the blitz, thinking he was the average rookie quarterback and he was going to struggle with it. I think Mike Tomlin's going to take a different tack and say, I'm going to throw some really, really inventive coverages at the young kid and see how he handles that.
Hey, John, you look at Ryan Matthews, and Frank Reich was asked about him today, and you wonder, we see so many timeshares in the NFL, but can Matthews be that kind of guy where he's splitting? Can he be effective if he's only going to get 9-10 carries here and there? Is that the way to truly get the best out of him?
No, I don't, and he kind of admitted it's not, but he's not healthy, as we usually say with Ryan Matthews. That's kind of an oxymoron. But, yeah, I mean, he is a guy who is better, like a lot of feature backs. If he's touching the ball at least 15 to 20 times a day at a game, and Frank kind of admitted to that, and I think all running backs are like that. They want to get a feel for the game, and he's no different. But, again, at practice, he had the heavy wrap on his left ankle. That was the reason why his touches were limited against Chicago. And it doesn't look like there's been much change in that ankle. So I think you're going to see running back by committee for at least a few more weeks until he gets completely healthy. Then I think you'll see it the opposite way, in that he'll get a few more touches than a guy like Darren Sproles.
John, against the Bears, you could have called that the Trey Burton coming out party a little bit. We weren't sure what to expect, and they used him a lot. Did Frank indicate that they want to see more of him in the game plan this week?
Yeah, I mean, Trey is one of those guys that it creates interesting matchups because of his athleticism. And the Eagles had been talking about it all off season, and the fact that they wanted to get him more involved in the offense. And it took 1 week because he got hurt before the opener. He wasn't there. And then all of a sudden you have the Zach Ertz injury. So they had to lean on him. And we all thought he could do the job because he's shown up so impressively in practices. But until you actually see it, you don't know it for sure. But he played very well. He only had 3 catches in his entire NFL career coming into the Chicago game. He caught 5. He had the touchdown. And I think you saw just some of the things he can do. And even when Zach comes back, Frank Reich made sure to say, look, he's a part of this offense. We want to get him involved. So I think it's going to continue even when Zach is back. It's not going to be quite as pronounced. There's no question about that. But he's still going to be a part of what the Eagles do.
John McMullen with us here, talking the Eagles and Steelers matchup. Now, you got your dig on Chip Kelly in a little bit earlier, but here's a chance for another one. So what did Jim Schwartz have to say about the 37 per game time of possession that his offense has the ball and how it's helped his defense?
Well, it's interesting because, everyone acts like it's common sense, and Jim was like that. Yeah, obviously it helps us. We're only on the field 52 plays a game. It's helpful. Well, it's not common sense for certain people who couldn't figure it out. And, it's one of those things. You look at Chip Kelly and you shake your head at him. Obviously, when your defense is on the field as much as the Eagles were, and again, we talked about the stat a lot. They averaged Eagles defenders played 18 games a year when compared to the number of snaps other teams in this league played. And through 2 games, the Eagles are the tops in football as far as time of possession, as far as the number of snaps their defense has been on the field. It's not always going to be that good. It's impossible to go through a season with your defense seeing 52 snaps a game. And one of the things Jim talked about was his defensive line rotation, and he hasn't got to use it as much as he would like to because they're never on the field. But it's a good problem to have.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. I want to get your thoughts on, because you talk about on the defensive side of the ball, Jim Schwartz has his handful this week, Antonio Brown, and what it's like to scheme for a guy like Brown because the Steelers, they move him around a lot, and the Eagles are already looking to be shorthanded again in the secondary here, but this isn't just a one-man piece of offense. I mean, they can run the ball. The tight end's been getting involved there, and they've got some lesser-known receivers that have, been a little bit been more productive than maybe their names suggest they can be. So it's a tricky situation when you're, Jim Schwartz this week trying to figure out, do you go after Antonio Brown and let these lesser-known guys beat you? How does he think he's going to attack that?
Well, it is difficult because he is kind of a Where's Waldo type player, and he does, as you mentioned, Mike, line up all over the field. And Jim kind of said, well, we'll figure out where number 84 is. That's not the issue. The problem is stopping him because he might be the best route runner in football. If he's not the best receiver overall, he's certainly in the top 2 or 3. His numbers over the past 3 years are just astonishing. It's like 110, 129, and 136 as far as receptions. That's the kind of production you're talking about from this guy. And you think about the Steelers offense as a whole and how good they would be if Le'Veon Bell was there and Martavis Bryant and Ladarius Green. None of those guys are there. And they still have Sammy Coates. And Jesse James is playing well at tight end. He's a Penn State guy. And they got a young slot receiver that does some nice things. So this offense is just really, and then by the way, you put a bow on it with a future Hall of Fame quarterback. I mean, this is good. This is as good as it gets offensively in this league, and they're not even close to being 100%. But it's very rare that when you look forward at this schedule of the Eagles, they're not going to see a better offense than this, and it's a big test, and Jim knows that.
John McMullen with us here on 97.3 ESPN. So, John, a big test. Now, the linebacker situation. Jim, what did Coach Schwartz say about the linebackers today? Because Stephen Tulloch made a little bit more appearances in the game against the Bears. Nigel Bradham had a key interception. What was his conversation today about the linebackers?
Well, Jim doesn't like to talk about his game plan or his plans for playing time, but it's pretty evident that he likes Stephen Tulloch and he likes him a lot. And it's an interesting situation because I got Jordan Hicks spoke after practice, and he's the guy who's losing some playing time when Tulloch gets on the field. And I haven't criticized Jim Schwartz for much. But I will criticize him there because that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Jordan Hicks is your best linebacker. And all-around linebacker. He should be your only three-down linebacker. And if you like Stephen Tulloch that much, fine, because he's a traditional Mike linebacker when we think about just downhill run stuffers and playing it, and he plays it well. And I don't have an issue with it. But Jordan Hicks has got to stay on the field. And if that means taking Michael Kendricks off or taking Nigel Bradham off, then you have to do that. So I don't agree with what Jim is doing as far as taking Jordan Hicks out of the game. And that's one of the few times I can say I look at him and say, I don't understand what you're doing.
Yeah, John McMullen's with us here, Sports Bash 97.3. Here's an interesting thing that we heard today. We used to hear it seemed like weekly during a Chip Kelly press conference. The X play, those dreaded X plays we would see all the time against Chip Kelly's Billy Davis's defenses there. The Eagles have given up 3 X plays during the 2 games so far. Is that something that Jim Schwartz has any worry about?
No, because as you mentioned, they gave up 3. The reason you heard about it so much was because the Eagles gave up so many last season. Now we got 3 in 2 games, and, hey, if you watch other NFL games, that's really, really good. You generally give up a number of X plays per game in today's environment, especially when you're playing good offenses. Now, again, we got to go back to competition. We always put that caveat on it. It's been really bad. The Browns are bad. The Bears are bad, and that changes, and I expect them to give up a few more big plays this week. But Jim's like, it's about preventing them from scoring points, and usually X plays mean points. And it's more difficult to have those big 13, 14, 15 play drives and go 80 yards because obviously it gives you more opportunities as an offense to make mistakes, whether it's a penalty, a holding penalty, a false start that could derail a drive. So the more you can stay away from those plays, the better. But Jim also said it's a fine line because if you get too sort of safety conscious and trying to keep everything in front of you, you can give up those 15, 16 play drives. And if they end up scoring 6 points that way, well, it really doesn't matter. 6 points is 6 points. So he's got his own interesting ways to look at things. But obviously he's very, very successful, not just here so far, but in his career as a defensive coordinator. So he's got a pretty good feel on his specific scheme and what he's doing, and I think you've seen that show up early this season.
All right, more on tomorrow's show. 5 on the Steelers. We'll dive into that with John tomorrow. His pick for the game is posted right now at 973ESPN.com. You can find out who John McMullen thinks will win the game and meet this week's opponent, the Pittsburgh Steelers, as 5 on the Steelers. Post it now at 973ESPN.com. We'll dive into that a little bit more when we talk to John tomorrow here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, John.
Hey,